start. I'm just going to get the go ahead from the guys. Okay, everyone, welcome to our event. Good evening, I'm Jeff Horseman. I'm the co-chair, along with Will McNally and Mike Pavlin, of Laurier HxA. Did I steal yours? Heterodox Academy, campus community here at Laurier University. I should first remind you that this event is being both live streamed and recorded for later public viewing on our YouTube channel. I've also been asked to point out the 4 emergency exits in the room. There's 2 at the back and 2 here at the front. Allow me a moment to explain what I think we're doing here and what I hope can be accomplished. In Canada, in recent years, governments have adopted the habit of passing laws about controversial topics, but skipping the essential step of fostering vigorous public debate and discussion. And gender identity is one such example. But what is gender identity? Is it experimentally detectable, reproducibly measurable, and independently verifiable? In short, what scientific evidence supports the existence of gender identity? That evidence component of the discussion is important because from gender identity flows consequential impacts, be it schools socially transitioning children without parental knowledge or biological males in women's prisons. The ramifications of codifying gender identity in law warrant further exploration. I hope this evening's discussion will be informative in that regard. I would like to thank Heterodox Academy for generous financial support, and I thank Wilfrid Laurier University for facilitating this event and providing support from our wonderful Special Constable Service. I also want to give a very big thank you to Free Speech Union Canada for advice and assistance in drafting the participation agreement. I thank our participants, Mia, Morgane, and John, for putting themselves out there to engage with this fraught topic. And of course, you, the audience, for taking the time to attend. Many faculty members avoid our events, so I appreciate your presence and your courage. Before I introduce our moderator, I will first remind everyone of what we call the HxA Way, guidelines for fostering open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. They are: make your case with evidence, be intellectually charitable and humble, be constructive, seek understanding, not victory, be yourself, be accountable, stand by your words, admit when you're wrong, and explain when you disagree. And finally, I'd just like to restate something that should be obvious. Speech is not violence. We reject physical attacks, threats, and harassment. Speech is the antidote to violence, not the precursor. I'm very grateful now to turn it over to a very capable moderator. Jonathan Kay is an editor at Quillette and author of several books. I've heard he also likes board games. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Kay.
So I don't have to use this, right? Because I have a lapel mic. You can all hear me. Sorry. You need me on this. All right. So thank you for that kind introduction. The mic's not on. It is. Sorry. We just can't get it on. Should I just speak? Yeah. You know. We'll need you with that in your hand, though. Okay. You need me. Can everybody hear? Okay. So very quick thing. How many people know me from social media? Okay. How many people would describe my behavior on social media as snide and caustic? Come on. Okay, for this setup, I need you to all put your hands up. Okay, thanks. Okay, wow, you all think I'm snide and caustic. So the reason I asked that question is because I am very snide and caustic on social media, especially X, formerly known as Twitter. Because it's Twitter, you have to be like that. But this is real life, and in real life, there are different rules. And when humans are together in the same room, I think most of us just instinctively become like our pre-Twitter selves and are kind to each other and respect one another and listen to what one another says. So just in that spirit, people are going to be asking questions later. Let's behave like humans do in their carbon-based form and not in their Twitter avatar form, okay? We could do even better than that. Great. High aspirations. The other thing I will say is that to the limited extent I will talk after these introductory remarks, I'll be referring to the debaters, the participants, by their first names, Mia, and I have learned it is properly pronounced Morgane, not Morgane. And I suggest, I know pronouns can be political for some people. I would suggest whatever your impulses are in that regard, wherever your politics fall, it's never impolite to refer to a person by their name. That's my practice in situations like this, especially when I have to be fastidiously neutral in my capacity as moderator. If anyone wants to throw paint or chain themselves to something, if you could do it now, because like what it's just it's like I just said, you start and then chaining themselves. Okay, and there's no radiators here, so it's forced air HVAC, which is good because sorry. Lamppost. I mean, I guess you could use this, but it's flimsy. Okay.
Outside at a lamppost.
So no one's. It's like a wedding. Do it now or forever. Okay, good. No pain or whatever. So I always do my dry cleaning after these events, just in case. And also just be very respectful. Everyone here traveled. Mia came from Ottawa. Morgane is based on the West Coast. I came from Toronto. The traffic's terrible, so like I'm a martyr too.
Just for living there.
Yeah, and all the other hardships associated with that city. With that said, hopefully you won't have to hear my voice much again. The two participants are going to give opening statements. I asked each of them who wants to go first. It's very Canadian and say, oh, you go, no, you go. So I get to decide. Morgane, please speak first. As you prefer, you can sit there, you're all mic'd up. And after 10 minutes, I'll do some passive aggressive thing, like I'll get up and I'll start clearing my throat or something. And then at 11 or 12 minutes, I might even say something. And, yeah.
That's great. Okay. Hi, folks. I'm Morgane Oger, revered and vilified by people who've never met me. And I'm going to be talking about this really interesting topic from my point of view, which is a social point of view. So every generation, someone inevitably invents a monster and a scandal to justify an attempt to grab some sort of a control. In the 1970s, it was Anita Bryant and her Save Our Children campaign that warned that gay teachers would recruit children. In the 1980s, people were jailed during the Satanic Panic, a tale of ritual abuse that never happened. In the 2010s, diversity education in Western Canadian schools was branded as a scheme to groom children. We had the D&D panic. We had all kinds of other things, movements that come up in opposition to a group. And today we're told gender-affirming care and transness is a medical scandal, that doctors mutilate children, parents are deluded or misguided or given false information, and that trans people are dangerous, like the gays were, like Dungeons and Dragons was. But as usual, the claims can lapse under scrutiny, and scrutiny is what matters. The claims rely on fear, not on facts, on anecdote amplified by tabloids and social media personalities, not on science. Science has a rigor, it has a process, it has validation. The urgency and the harm are manufactured, we discover so often, and I propose this is the case here in much of this topic. Sociologist Stanley Cohen once wrote, societies appear to be subject every now and then to periods of moral panic, when a condition or group is defined as a threat to societal values. A group is demonized, scandal is invented, and control is sold as protection. So across decades and continents, the evidence is consistent. Now, we will probably have some debate about this evidence. The WPATH Standards of Care version 8 in 2022, gender-affirming care improves mental health and reduces suicidality. The Canadian Pediatric Society in 2023, maybe a less ideological organization, recommends affirming multidisciplinary care, especially for minors. The AAP in 2018, that's the American Association of Pediatrics, I believe, and reaffirmed in 2023 that denial of care increases risk for trans kids. StatsCan in 2025, this month, said that trans Canadians report higher life satisfaction and lower suicidal ideation when affirmed. The data comes in slowly, but the data is coming in. The Lancet in 2021, they want me to talk louder. My mom said, don't talk too loud, they'll call you a man. The Lancet in 2021, long-term outcomes show lasting well-being. Affirmation helps, rejection harms, and this is the medical consensus today. Of course, consensus is not absolute rule, there is always dissent. What happens when fear becomes policy, though? In the UK, 17-year-old Laia Sampson-Grimbley recently, not so long ago, died waiting for gender-affirming care. She did everything right, actually. She's like the gold star of how you go through looking for gender-affirming care. She reached out, she trusted the system, until delays broke her. She happened to do this at a time where the UK was going through a trans panic. The coroner ruled that her death was preventable. That word, preventable, should haunt every policymaker hiding behind the Cass review, which is a politicized UK review, whose findings were that we need to do better science and we need to get some better results and more evidence over time. Intended to improve care, however, the review caused paralysis. The UK utterly stopped providing care to trans youth and trans kids, and we're starting to see the consequences of it. Since April 2024, NHS in England has withheld puberty blockers outside research and delayed hormones for minors. Caution is not neutral when young people die. There's a difference between caution and being slow and caution and refusing things and causing harm. Right? Caution that costs lives is actually cruelty. The British Medical Association refused to endorse the Cass review because it was quite flawed. A Yale analysis found the review biased and methodologically unsound, but the government of the UK implemented it anyways, having campaigned on it, and now a child is dead. Now, one child does not make a statistic. I know that, but there will be more. We know there will be more. Laurier reminds us that evidence delayed is care denied. And this is really important, I think, in today's conversation. Canada chose a different path, which is being criticized by some people in this room. The Canadian Human Rights Act added gender identity and expression in 2017 to formalize what the legal precedent had been saying since the 1990s. The Charter guarantees equality in Section 15 and ensures equal rights for women and men. In the eyes of Canadian law, women and men is everybody. They don't take into account non-binary people. So don't get all upset and don't laugh at the same time. And that includes, but also that includes trans women under Section 28. In ACV Manitoba in 2009, the Supreme Court upheld that minors may consent to care based on capacity, not age. There's very, very few things that are limited on age. One of them is gender-affirming surgical care, one of the very few things where with Canadian policy is to say no until you're an adult, except in extraordinary situations. Canadian law already balances autonomy and protection, and we don't need new exclusions, just respecting our rights and understanding why rights exist. But opponents of equality disguise control as caution and ideology as science, says Morgane Oger. Autogynephilia, the claim that trans women transition from fetish, is rejected by all medical bodies that matter. Yet it persists. WPATH and the APA call it unsupported by empirical evidence. Rapid onset dysphoria came from an online parent survey, not clinical research. They literally went and found a chat room of moms who were upset their kids were trans and pulled them into creating the subjects for a survey who found that there's no such thing as being trans and that happens suddenly, says the mom of the trans kids who reject transness. The AAP and CPS state it's not a recognized diagnosis, not a diagnosis, yet waved around under words like scandal. In the UK, rape by deception is a thing. Laws centered around that have been weaponized against trans people for not disclosing gender history. Never been used for not disclosing anything else, and not used against people who don't disclose that they hate trans people. Trapping poor, innocent trans people into a relationship with a bigot. Clutch my pearls. So, I lost my place. Legal experts such as Alex Sharp in 2020 condemned this distortion of consent law used to police identity. I invite you to consider how many identities people don't want to find out about you, and you shouldn't go to prison over. The UN expert on SOGI in 2023 warned of a coordinated anti-gender movement eroding democratic norms. The Southern Poverty Legal Law Center in 2023 found overlaps between anti-trans activism and far-right networks. And every time identity, equality, ideas expand, someone calls it an emergency. Every time I come to a talk like that, someone from some weird, violent, extreme right group contacts me. Without fail, happened this time. This time it was a slightly different topic, but it's the same thing. When inclusion is practiced, though, harm drops, and it's just really about harm. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports found no evidence trans inclusion undermines women's sports. UN Women in 2024 reported that individualized assessments improved fairness and safety. You respect the rights, and the harms fall. You restrict rights, and the harms rise. It's that simple. But we also have to address women's services and sex-based rights. Terms twisted to justify exclusion. I'm sure we're going to get into it tonight. In Canadian and international law, these rights protect from discrimination. They do not authorize discrimination. The CHRC, Canadian Human Rights Commission, CEDAW, I always forget the acronym, but the Convention on I forget the acronym. It's UN Women's Rights. And the UN and UN Women affirm that women's rights include trans women's rights. Trans women rely on the same shelters, clinics, and prisons because our risks are the same as cis women for the most part. There might be some specialized differences, but very, very few. And everybody deserves equality. Everybody deserves dignity in a service, especially in a crisis. Nevertheless, discrimination is not based on someone else might need something. Discrimination needs to be based on you need something more, you're more vulnerable. We're going to give you a special thing for you because you're more vulnerable. That's the fundamental of our law. Turf rhetoric, in the end, isn't about protection. It's about power. And when I say turf, I mean it respectfully, not how I normally mean it. Trans-exclusionary radical feminists, which is like a second wave feminism that talks about the wins women need in the physical world. So equality is not a zero-sum game. Safety, we're at 10 now? Ish. Almost there. I'm about to hit the closing. I talked slowly, and I had to talk loudly. That slows me down. I'm not used to it. Trans women rely on the same shelter. Oh, I just talked about it. So equality is not a zero-sum game, and safety built on exclusion isn't safety at all. Limits painted as safety are still oppression. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, U.S. Supreme Court judge whose fall brought down Roe versus Wade, let's put that in context, right? Warned that laws protecting women often kept them in a gilded cage. She talked about this a lot. She talked about how the people in the cage didn't have the key. Justice Bertha Wilson in R.V. Morgenthaler, the abortion case, wrote, "The right to liberty guarantees a degree of personal autonomy over decisions of fundamental importance to them." That's what human rights mean, protecting autonomy against the comfort of the majority. Every expansion of rights once seemed radical because it was unknown before it became obvious. Equality in marriage, the right to autonomy on your body, the right of children. That rhythm of progress is how we keep Canada free, fair, and kind. And that's the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we proceed, I just want to, as a technical matter, just talk about some of the terms that were used, because there's a whole kind of language that surrounds this issue. OHCHR is the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I had to look that up myself.
That's the Ontario Human Rights Commissioner.
Okay, sorry.
CHRC is Canadian.
Okay. I thought you were talking about the United Nations.
Please put up, okay, no,
There was,
CEDAW,
yeah.
CEDAW is the Commission on the Equality, something of women.
Okay, WPATH, that you mentioned, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, which presents itself as the authority on health care.
Its technical reports are considered the authority.
Can you push the mic up here? Sure, sorry about that. The CAS review commissioned in 2020 was independent review of the treatment of trans youth in the national Britain's NHS by Dr. Hilary Cass, who I believe was the head of pediatrics within the system. Autogynephilia, a contested condition, describes the state of self-attraction of some males who identify as trans. Rapid onset gender dysphoria.
ROGD.
Yeah, Morgane spoke about in passing. Was a term coined, I guess, about a decade ago by a then Brown University researcher named Lisa Littman, and it describes typical young, well, girls, adolescents, not just girls, but typically girls, who manifest trans identification abruptly. And TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist, I think it's fair to say it's often used as a term of abuse.
It's often a pejorative.
Yeah, I'm more.
But it's actually self-described.
Since we're being all super polite, another term for it might be gender critical. Sometimes. They
So
use it.
gender critical came later.
Yep.
Gender critical people don't necessarily consider themselves feminist unless they add to it.
I'm just giving linguistic menu options. For people.
So much to
and
choose from.
With that said, Mia, please take the floor for 10 minutes.
My turn. Okay, how's my sound? Is it all right?
Oh, you have to yell.
I don't have a very loud voice. I have a very soft voice. Can you all hear me?
A little louder.
Does it help if she uses this?
Yeah,
Should I
probably
use it?
not.
No?
No, sorry.
Okay, I'll do my
More for the
best.
recording and the stream of the
Okay. So the topic of this evening's event is gender identity, the evidence and the impact. In 2002, the Northwest Territories became the first jurisdiction in Canada to add gender identity to its Human Rights Act. Unbeknownst to Canadians, that was the moment our nation began its descent into chaos, when the most basic facts about human existence began to be dismantled and the sex-based protections of women and girls started to crumble. Over the next 15 years, every province and territory added gender identity to human rights codes, despite having no clear definition of what the term means. In 2017, the federal government brought the era to a close with Bill C-16, adding gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. Along the way, no lawmaker paused to ask what would happen if a self-declared identity with no objective measures became a protected characteristic in Canadian law. No one considered how it might affect the rights of women and girls. When objections were raised, they were ignored or dismissed as hate and bigotry. It's astounding to me that gender identity was enshrined in federal law without ever being defined. Neither Bill C-16 nor the amendments that followed supplied a definition, leaving policymakers and courts, tribunals to rely on provincial codes or federal departments for a definition. One such definition is that of the Department of Justice, which I'll read to you now in full. Brace yourselves. The Department of Justice Canada defines gender identity as each person's internal and individual experience of gender, their sense of being a woman, a man, both, neither, or anywhere along the gender spectrum. For some persons, their gender identity is different from the gender typically associated with their sex assigned at birth. This is often described as transgender or simply trans. This is incoherent activist gibberish, an unscientific, unfalsifiable concept with no objective criteria or legal clarity. By contrast, every other protected characteristic in Canada, such as sex, race, age, sexual orientation, is objectively verifiable and clearly defined. So what happens when you structure society around subjective feelings rather than material reality? You erode the vital safeguards that depend on reality, namely the sex-based protections essential to the privacy, safety, and protection of women and girls. Because in truth, gender identity as a protected characteristic permits any male to self-declare a female gender identity and access female-only spaces. This is astonishing when you consider that male people commit most sex offenses and female people make up most of their victims. In Canadian prisons, inmates now have the option to be housed based on self-declared gender identity, and this policy has allowed violent male criminals, including those convicted of murder and sexual assault, to transfer into the female estate. In women's shelters, rape crisis centers, and hospital wards, women in states of extreme vulnerability find themselves forced to share intimate spaces with males. And in everyday self-policing spaces, such as bathrooms and changing rooms, women must accept the presence of men, knowing that questioning or challenging a man's self-declared female identity could be considered discrimination or hate. The fact of the matter is, the two protected characteristics, sex and gender identity, cannot coexist. It's not logically possible to protect both. Instead, it's a zero-sum situation. Protecting one inevitably nullifies the other. But tonight, I'll also argue that the concept of a gender identity is a dangerous oversimplification, one that ultimately does more harm than good, even to those who identify as transgender, because it condenses a complex array of psychological, developmental, and social phenomena into one single label. Within this category, there are adult males with an erotic fixation on being female, homosexuals with internalized homophobia, adolescents with neurodiversity, psychiatric comorbidities, or developmental confusion, all adopting a one-size-fits-all label that comes with a drastic medical pathway as a remedy. Which brings me to another downstream effect of giving gender identity legitimacy in law that rarely gets mentioned. Once cemented into our human rights code, the concept was then able to migrate into our schools. Children as young as kindergarten, in kindergarten who still believe in Father Christmas are told that they have gender identities, that they can choose whether they're boys or girls. There are posters adorning classrooms that declare there can be male women, female men, humans of both sexes or no sex at all. And this is not presented to children as a belief or a political ideology, but as scientific fact. And no one responsible for safeguarding stopped to question what would be the consequences of untethering an entire generation of children from reality. From our vantage point in 2025, the catastrophic effects are undeniable. We now have legions of confused young people thinking they have a mismatched gender identity and therefore need body parts chopped off, who find themselves in the hands of a field of medicine also affected by gender identity being enshrined into our law. Because in 2021, our government further entrenched the concept with the passage of Bill C-4, the so-called conversion therapy ban, that forbids efforts to help distressed youth reconcile with their sex and avert the need for medical intervention. So I've often asked myself, how could no one foresee the absolute chaos on the horizon? But Sherry De Novo, the NDP MPP who introduced gender identity into Ontario's Human Rights Code in 2012, actually provides the answer in 2021, in her 2021 memoir. Noting how her private member's bill impacted the way our entire province did business, she had this to say: "I don't believe for an instant that the government realized the scope of that one change. I'm glad they didn't look too closely." That candid admission captures the very essence of the problem. Gender identity entered Canadian law not through rigorous analysis or scientific validation, but through political momentum and moral enthusiasm. Lawmakers did not ask what the concept meant, how it would interact with sex-based rights, or what downstream effects it might have on policy coherence or child safeguarding. So here we are, more than a decade later, finally having the conversation that should have happened before gender identity was written into law. And because we're doing it backwards, there are those who frame even asking questions or raising concerns as discrimination or hate. Which brings me to my final point. Adding gender identity as a protected characteristic in law hasn't just conflicted with the rights of women and girls and the right of children to a childhood grounded in truth. It also conflicts with the fundamental rights enshrined in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because everyone is expected to believe or pretend to believe in a person's self-declared gender identity or risk being accused of hate and discrimination. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone in a free democratic society is entitled to hold any belief that they choose. If someone wishes to believe that they possess a gender identity that doesn't match their sex body, that's their right. But what many people seem to have forgotten is that with freedom of belief comes the freedom not to believe. So I'm going to lay my cards on the table and say that I do not believe in the existence of gender identities, and I won't pretend that I do. And I also make no apologies for that, because non-belief is not discrimination and non-belief is not hate. The right to question, to disagree, even to offend is the bedrock of democracy. And so for the sake of women's rights, child protection, and medical safeguarding, it's essential that we now have this gender identity debate openly, honestly, and without fear.
Okay, thank you to both participants for being very close to 10 minutes. Thought I'd have to
How
intervene.
did I?
Mia, we say Santa, not Father Christmas here.
And
That's right.
I wrote Santa, and I
Yeah.
said Father Christmas.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. Immigrants. Subject for another debate, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to ask just two quick questions just to challenge some of the presumptions, and then we'll open them up to audience members. That's okay. Mia, did I interpret you correctly? You said that the idea of biological sex, or the fact of biological sex, and the idea of gender identity, they're fundamentally incompatible?
Yes.
Okay. Is that really true? Like, I'm no wishy-washy, liberal at heart. And my view is, if somebody says, I just have this passionately felt identity that I'm a woman, even though biologically I'm male, and I try to desist or whatever, it's really, it's something that's just part of who I am, it's part of my identity, and for social purposes and professional purposes, and on my business card and my social media, and maybe even, government ID, I'm going to adopt a gender identity that suits, these are loaded terms, but identity, spirit, your sense of who you are. But, I also draw the line when it comes to prisons and sports and all those other things. But isn't it okay to say that we can have a gender identity-based identification system for social and professional? Like 99% of life doesn't require us to invoke our biological sex. Like once you're outside sports and locker rooms and stuff like that, can't they coexist?
Well, I mean, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about the time, those occasions, those situations in life when sex matters. So anyone can identify however they like. I don't care, do whatever. But there are times when sex matters. That's in spaces, in private spaces for women and girls. It's logically impossible to have a male give men the right to identify as female and enter female-only spaces, because as soon as a male enters a female-only space, of course, it becomes mixed sex. So
Okay.
that's what I mean
But
by
you're not
zero
against-
sum.
You're not against the social and professional reasons, like just, you're not against it on principle, right? Where it doesn't impinge on protected, and Morgane, I'm gonna ask you about this issue just in a second. I just want to follow up. So you're not, in principle, you're against it. You're not against it.
I mean, again, identify however you like. Of course, you can't become a woman, and so there's something to. It's completely impossible for a man to be a woman, obviously, and so. In that sense, linguistically, it's impossible. I'm talking in spaces, it's zero sum, and I identify however you like otherwise.
Morgane, I actually heard something that maybe there was a point of agreement between the two of you, because toward the end of your presentation, you talked about, it was in passing, but you talked about the reality of sex-based differences in certain situations, if I interpreted you correctly.
Okay.
If you could expand on that, and because I'm all about bringing people together, right?
So
If there is crossover between the two of you, that's often where the most interesting dialogue takes place.
Well, first, before I do that, I got to get on my podium here. You know, Mia, you say some things that are verifiably untrue. It's not Bill C-16 that brought trans women into bathrooms. It's a Supreme Court ruling in 1999. It has nothing to do with the Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Law reflected a legal ruling upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada. Without Bill C-16, the Supreme Court of Canada ruling upholds. And that was actually about discrimination at the workplace. You know, Oger v. Watcott in 2019 was not fundamentally based on Bill C-16. Well, it wasn't, it was provincial, but it was fundamentally based on the right to live free of someone making excuses under religious excuses, because beliefs do not trump the right to live free of discrimination. That's a really important thing. I may believe that transphobes are terrible people, but I'm not allowed to, for example, deny service to a transphobe because of their belief, right? You know, in my lens of transphobe. Someone who has belief-based views is protected in all our systems. And that's really important here, really important, right? Now back to, there are some places where there are objective needs. There are some places where there are objective needs. In some places like in medicine, right? Medicine is a place where sex is the biological aspects of sex and the biological aspects, for example, of change of sexual characteristics over time. You know, so enzyme pathways, where's our host here? Enzyme pathways, you know, some interesting research on the impact of HRT on the way your body behaves. It's not your genetics that decide that, it's the environment. There are also
narrowly, like medically clinical categories.
There are also possibly places where you have a physiological need, right? Like, for example, let's talk about physical professions, right? Where perhaps we will say we are going to, on the basis of sex, give different tests to get to access the job. For example, I hope I'm not wrong, like firefighters conceptually, maybe load carrying capacity based on physiology, things like this. There are numerous societal aspects where physical attributes matter. For example, our discrimination law on the basis of disability protects us, right? And that's specifically about capability. That law protects us from discrimination on the basis of physical capability, except when that physical capability is a specific factor in the ability to do the job, for example. And in the same way, you could have, and you have special cases in BC, our human rights law is a little bit nuanced, I believe, in here. You have the ability to apply to have a specific thing, and you can say, for this role, we need to violate this protection from discrimination because it's better for our society, because it uplifts a group that is more discriminated against, and therefore we will hire a person
We've seen that
in a discriminatory way.
When universities hire, we sometimes have seen that in the news. Right?
So I want to caution against the concept of like EDI-based preferential hiring, which I don't think really exists. It's preferential pipelines, not the hiring, right? But
this might be
people, that could create a huge fight, right? I have never seen it. I hire people in my work, and we never, ever have seen that. But the pipeline might be preferential, like trying to invite people of a certain demographic or something like this. There is no, the place where we really disagree is on the presumption, right? It is presumed by some people that, for example, trans women, because we have or once have had male bodies, that we are of a certain behavior type or we have a certain strength type. I just recently suffered an accident because I didn't have the strength to hold myself up to prevent the accident, mostly due to, sitting on my butt too much, and secondarily due to the huge loss of strength that I experienced from, what you would call castration and from hormone treatment. Huge impact on my strength, which is really interesting. And also we have sports, but sports are always talked about as a disadvantage. I thought it was really fascinating to see. I don't remember which long distance race. There was an advantage in all kinds of directions.
I want to start you because I anticipate that some of the audience questions may be about sports, so you'll both get an opportunity to respond. I would now invite people.
May I just respond to one thing?
I did say she lied, so let's give her a chance.
Oh, it's not. I wasn't going to go there. Okay, the C16. I was just tracking gender identity getting in. It's not. I'm not saying that's what ended up. That's what put men in the bathrooms or anything like that. But I do want to just go to the point that you just made that. People that hold my opinion, I assume you're talking about me, presume a certain type of behavior from trans-identified males, and that's not true at all. It's males. I separate between males and females, and we know statistically that males commit almost all violent crime and almost all sex offenses, and in the case of sex offenses, women make up most of the victims. That statistically plays out all over the world wherever there are crime stats. So I'm not saying males who identify as women are any particular behavior type. I'm just saying, statistically speaking, males have a propensity to violence.
Like I can say that statistically speaking, cisgender people, all of you who are not trans, do 99% of the violence, 99% of the crime, 99% of the fraud. And I could say, which would be ridiculous, that clearly, statistically speaking, y'all are just a bunch of criminals. But I wouldn't say that because I'm not trying to mess with statistics wrongly. I am not, what you're saying is throughout the world, the statistic has been, it's your sex that puts you into bucket A or bucket B for the categorization. Except in Canada, we are just starting to put us into another dimension now. So we have the sex and we have the gender. And then this way we can look and we can start to see. And in this system, you have not addressed that actually it's not your genetics that decide if you're going to be a person who, for example, assaults others. It's your expectation to get away with it. And that it just turns out in our society, men expect to get away with violence more, and it's been well documented. I'd have to pull up the references. ChatGPT is perfect for this. You can pull the references, but it's not the genetics that define whether or not you're going to be a sexual assaulter, for example. It's they chose to get away with it, which has been demonstrated partially in LGBT couples, where the person who does the sexual assault is not always the male. It's actually under privilege and control. The person with privilege and with the control is the abuser, almost systematically.
I'm going to invite people, if you want to ask a question. I think we're doing it here.
Just come down to this side here, and John will bring the mic over.
And I will bring the mic over, and if people don't have questions, I actually kind of like this discussion. I thought it's very interesting. And I obviously have questions to ask. But this is your opportunity to ask a question. I invite you to come down this way. And also the usual caveat, it's a question, it's not a manifesto. And the question shouldn't begin with the words, where do you get off saying that? Like, so in keeping with orthodox academy values, please,
And you know, the people you're asking question are highly caffeinated, tend to be a reflection of the attitude in the question.
And best questions are in the spirit of genuine curiosity as opposed to listening at a pre-programmed answer. That said, I'm going to hold the mic just in case.
You can hold the mic?
You don't
Go for it.
run away with it. It's like the first rule of this kind of thing. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ian. Salut Morgane. My name's Tamir. I'm a student here at Laurier. And I guess my question is about the fundamental premise behind gender ideology, transgenderism, gender affirming care, whatever you want to call it. So I think in your opening statements, you went straight for, I think within the first 2 minutes, maybe you mentioned the CAST review and a bunch of medical literature and studies. And I think that's very important because that's what's at the crux of this. Ultimately, the claim that I've heard about becoming trans and gender ideology, identity, is that there is a mental health crisis and people need gender affirming care to resolve that. And so given that trans identifying people and people who have gone through this program still exhibit 3 to 4 times more anxiety and depression than cisgender people, and they have a chance of 1 in 3, I believe, or it's 1 in 3 have attempted suicide is the statistic. So given that mental health and mental illness still persists, how can we determine this to be the correct course of action in treating the underlying problem?
Okay, so the question is about psychiatric comorbidities, which persist after
And causality.
After transition.
Christian's causality.
I'm going to go to Mia first, just because we just came off Morgane, you speaking for a bit, but you'll get a chance to respond. Mia, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, we do have a serious lack of follow-up research with individuals who've gone through this medical pathway. So it's a remarkable field of medicine in that they perform interventions that have lifelong effects, and then they don't bother to follow up at all. So the limited research that we have, short term can show some mental health benefits. There's a honeymoon period typically, and then longer term will show higher rates of suicide and mental health issues. So there's not any clear evidence that it improves mental health. The research in the field is weak anyway, so whatever you want, when you turn to the research, you don't typically get answers because it's methodologically poor. But I think what you need to, transgender people, this community is it's all lumped together, but it's a very diverse group. And it depends what the person's reason for seeking medical transition, and the outcome is going to be very different. I personally have not seen any evidence to suggest that this is safe, beneficial in the long term, or in any way an appropriate way to treat individuals with a psychological issue, if that answers your question.
Well, I've actually gone through transition, so I have some actual firsthand experience and knowledge. And I've spoken to a great many trans people, both as an advocate and also in crisis situations. and in very challenging legal situations. Here are my observations. On the personal note, I have really noticed that when you're thinking about transitioning, you are thinking about how you can't live like you're living anymore. And one day you decide, I can't do this anymore. And it's really interesting. But I transitioned as an adult, okay? I was in my 40s. Many reasons for that. We can have a huge conversation about it. Mostly it was because I never saw room for myself before. I couldn't live like that anymore. That was like the mindset. But at the same time, I was so afraid of what was going to happen because I could see what the world around me was like. Somewhat hostile. That thing was, somewhere between quite hostile and immensely hostile. If you want to know where the hostility is, go on Twitter and read the comments to me about this event. Okay? And then read the comments to me about me saying something about that Charlie Kirk guy, right? And just have a look at the hostility. Cis women also deal with a lot of hostility. Fascinating, the hostility towards trans people. Trans women, maybe sometimes a surprise that it's going to be they're actually seeing hostility towards women. So that's.
Can I ask you to bring us back to the question
So-
though, is about comorbidities?
I am actually.
Okay, good.
Because people transition because they can't live the way they're living. And then they're afraid of how they're going to be treated. And often they're treated worse than they thought they would be treated. And they might feel that if they made it a medical transition, they might feel that they've committed to something that can't roll back. And some people start to realize, my goodness, this aspect is making my life even harder because people are so awful to me. Everybody who has experienced discrimination, I think, knows what I'm talking about, that life can be just awful from discrimination or from the perceived expectation of discrimination. And some people start to react to the intensity of the negativity in a downward spiral. And I have seen this for some people do this. However, I've also seen that statistically, a minority, like less than 1/10 of people I know have expressed to me that their lives were worse, except for the social aspects of their lives, the way they are treated, the way they are looked at, and things like this. And when I speak with mental health specialists about the phenomenon that we kind of land on isn't that the comorbidities were necessarily the same. So when we're talking about why mental health degrades for trans people, it comes from societal injury, basically. And then the question is, and that's been a really interesting question for a long, long time, which is, do we deny treatment that will make lives better to a degree? Do we deny those people treatment if they have comorbidity? Do we say, you can't because you're limping, and you can't because you're on the spectrum, and you can't because you're because of whatever things, and the mental health providers, they struggle with this because there's a vast difference between being on a spectrum and having psychotic episodes.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you off just because I see the line is long.
And I could go on.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sure Mia could. I've heard Mia.
she has more discipline than I do.
Simon Kiss, Professor of Political Science here at Laurier.
Professor gets the vote.
And, I have two questions. One to Morgane.
Okay.
Although you touched on it a little bit, but maybe if you wanted to expand on it, it'd be okay. In the spirit of curiosity, maybe you could share with us like what it is like to be a pre-transition
Pre-transition
male, and what the feelings are like, and what drives a person to transition in that way. I'm not sure all of us know, and I'm a bit mystified. So it would be productive if you could share with us. And then my second question is to both of you, and it's a question about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So there is a big debate about whether the Charter is actually the best way to protect, or a judicially enforceable Bill of Rights is actually the best way to protect individual rights and liberties in Canada. And the case is not entirely clear. I actually was reasonably happy to see glimmers of compromise or a common ground there in your conversation. And I wonder if, in your observation of how this policy is being played out, and it's going to be litigated in the Charter, and it's going to be inflected by rights talk, and I wonder if we might be better off if this policy was being brokered by elected politicians who are in the business of talking to people and finding compromise and making trade-offs rather than judges.
Okay, so Mia first, and just to summarize, although that was very lucid, the idea whether elected legislatures.
No, she has to answer what it's like.
What's it like to be cis, man?
Explain to us, why did you become, how did you know that you were not trans?
And then,
like a normal person.
Yeah, so would it be better if elected politicians were doing it instead of judges? Because of course there's all sorts of cynicism in some circles about unelected judges and so forth. And then
doing what? What would it be better if elected officials are doing what?
If this issue were, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, were resolved without reference at every point to the wording of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and which of course is done by judges. And if elected legislators had more discretion to set policy according to their views without being rigidly bound by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms on this issue. And it sounds like this is a blue sky question. It's not a legal question. It's kind of a question of, if I'm interpreting correctly, would we have better outcomes, better kinds of debate, better compromises if we weren't running to the courts and saying, where does this stand under the Charter? If I'm interpreting the question correctly, it's would politicians just dealt with it as a matter of first instance as opposed to deferring to the Charter? Would that be better?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is the best place. I don't think the courts are the best place for this, and I don't think we need to, well, I fear that we're heading for individual cases just being fought, battled here and there. However, politicians are the ones who got us in this mess in the first place. So the very idea that they would get us out of it.
I'm going to push back on that. The Canadian tradition on things like abortion, gay marriage, has been to just kick it to the courts. And I think a critic would say that legislators have been more than happy to let the courts take charge because they don't have the courage to do it. And which I'm saying that, I'm not saying I prefer one outcome or the other, but let's assume a world where politicians have the courage to grapple.
Sure.
I think that's the spirit of the question. Would that be a better world?
Yeah, I think it would. I think it's hard to, once this concept is written into law, it's very hard to change it. But I think if politicians can face up to the fact that they supported something they didn't understand, they wrote something into law that was incoherent and completely conflicting with the rights of half of the population, I think, yeah, if they had the courage to face that and put it right. I don't think it's an impossible situation. I think it could be put right, but everyone has to start from reality, not with the incoherency of.
Okay, Morgane, and I realize you have two questions to answer.
I'll answer this question first.
Okay.
Speaking of reality versus perception, I think it's important to talk about the reality about how human rights law gets put in. Having quite a bit of specific knowledge about how gender identity or expression was protected, it took 20 years. The first time it was considered, I believe, was in 1905. And then again a little bit later on, like in 1910. And then again in 2010 and 2015. Three parties promised on this to try to get elected. One party won an election on this, amongst others. Gender identity or expression was before Parliament for well over a decade in the books being debated. This is not exactly, it's not exactly truthful to pretend that Canadians woke up one day and then there were trans people around, and the protection from discrimination. It's a little disingenuous. It might have been a surprise to you. You might not have been here when this was happening, I don't know. But trans people have been fighting for equality in British Columbia and in Canada since the 1970s, slowly turning the crank. And we very, very, very slowly, after reams and reams and reams of paper were wetted with ink, finally got our equal protection from explicitly prohibited discrimination, which is a tiny, tiny protection. It's protection in the workplace, protection in services, protection in statistics, and consideration in hate crimes law.
Okay, so your answer is that, in fact, legislators have had their say.
They had
Okay.
an enormous amount of say, and like a mature democracy does, the legislators negotiated a law over a decade to a point that's super simple: the same rights as religion,
Okay.
the same rights
I'm going to invite.
as all kinds of other explicitly prohibited grounds of discrimination. I'm not done.
I'm
And
going to invite
then
you.
we put it to
Morgane,
the courts,
Morgane.
just like we put all the other rights. to
And
the
this
courts.
is strictly, not to put my finger on the scale, it's just we've got other people, and you have a second question to answer.
I
so,
do. What's it like?
And then Mia has the right of rebuttal. So this whole thing, and it's weird to sum up your whole life story in like 60 seconds, but I'm going to ask you to do that.
Look, for 30 years, I thought that maybe I could somehow manage to not be stuck as a guy, stuck the way I was living, but I couldn't imagine how it was possible. All of the examples before me were examples that were very, very clear cautionary tales about what happens to you if you try this. And then in the end, over time, especially through my 30s, this conflict in my heart kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then I had children, and I thought, okay, that'll sort me out. I'll just have children and be the good caregiving daddy to my kids, and everything was fine. And then one day I snapped. I think basically it's what I would say, I snapped. And I snapped when my daughter was telling me about how people were being mean to her about something or other in elementary school. And I caught myself telling her, as long as you're true to who you are, you're going to be fine. And then the thought that overwhelmed me was, not like I'm being, right? That I am not being true to myself, as who I am. And then that was like the cut for me. Was it a break? Was it a mental health crisis? I wouldn't say so at all. The vast majority of trans people aren't in a mental health crisis. The vast majority of people just figure out who they are, figure out, I'm not like this guy over there. I'm more like this guy over here.
Okay, thank you for that, and I appreciate that was concise and also very evocative. I appreciate that. Mia, right of rebuttal, not to the second part, but the first part.
Yeah, just a quick. So when I'm talking, I understand that the trans-identified community had been fighting for their rights for decades leading up to the gender identity movement, but the concept of gender identity is very new. And like De Novo said in her memoir, no one knew what they were supporting. Nobody looked closely. And we even know that from another person present in the early days, Robert Wintermute, who professor of human rights law at King's College London. He was a signatory of the Yogyakarta Principles in 2006, which is the blueprint for modern trans activism. It's enshrined gender identity, or it was how nations could enshrine gender identity into law. And he was in Yogyakarta, in Indonesia, in that meeting, and he said, I think in 2021, he said, nobody was thinking about women. There were trans activists in the room, and they said, this is what we need. We need protection on gender identity. And everybody in the room said, okay, this is what you need, we'll give it to you. They didn't think about women. They didn't think about the LGB. They just did what the activists asked. And I think it was partly because it came right on the back of gay rights, and it looked a lot like gay rights, and it just looked like another vulnerable, oppressed minority seeking equality. So yes, it's true that there was a movement before, but the gender identity movement came along very, very fast, got put into law without anyone understanding it.
I would like to clarify.
No,
something.
sorry,
No, there's something important to clarify.
Roll it into the next.
I remember
answer, please.
being in
No,
debates.
Morgane,
about whether we were
Morgane,
talking about gender
Morgane.
identity.
I'm going to have to move on to the next question because look at them, they're all standing up. You're sitting down. Next question.
Hi, Morgane. This may sound like a gotcha question, but no, I'm just trying to understand. So in the phrase, trans women are women, what does the word women mean?
Does what women mean?
What does the word women mean in that phrase?
So are we talking about a legal text here or an identity
No,
question?
just, I guess, what does it mean to you?
So to me, well, when I'm asked, what is a woman? Boy, that's not a trap question, is it?
It's a fair question.
Well,
It's a good
fair
question.
So to me, what a woman is a person who says and knows she's a woman. What does it mean under the law?
No,
Does it
no,
mean-
no, no.
No, but it doesn't, it's really
We talked a
interesting.
lot about the law, but
But the law is a protection of people, right? So really interesting thing is, you see, we talked about gender identity movement, right? But it could have just been a belief system. Transness is protected under the belief system, under the protection of
Morgane, I'm
religion,
gonna bring
which
you
is
back
a
to
really
the
interesting
question.
one. So
I'm
for me, what a trans person is a person, so a woman is a person who functions in society as a woman. There are numerous aspects of women who do not function in society under the comprehensive list of what females function in society under. Now you're gonna have to wait on that one. Is sex defining or foundational aspect of being a woman? I would say it's foundational. I would say it's not defining. There's lots of people who will say, no, sex is.
what's the difference between defining and foundational?
I would say that the assumption of a woman is a list of things. You know, a woman is a fertile person in her fertile age. A woman is a person who is statistically smaller than a man. A woman is a person of a certain life expectancy, of a certain physical appearance, and things like this. A woman is also a person of a certain meta role. You could say, well, women, you can generally scan the room and get a 70% hit on who the women are in the room.
And this is how you define a woman.
But may,
that's-
The question is
may
To
I,
me, that's how I see it.
may I
But
just
at the
ask
same
a
time,
clarifying question?
it doesn't matter how you in the blue shirt who asked the question sees me. It doesn't matter how I see you. Really, it only matters if we're going to interact, right? If we interact, it matters
But he did
that
ask you
I'm
the
a
question.
woman
He
and
was
I see
interacting.
myself as a woman,
Okay.
and that he sees himself, I presume, this person sees themselves, I'll presume it's a he. Yes?
Can I just
Oh,
ask a
yeah,
clarifying?
there's a guy. No, before, the
What's
question
up with you?
before. You asked a question,
okay,
right?
Mia.
You did.
Okay,
Mia?
I just,
So
okay.
it's a question of courtesy and functioning, as well as it is a question of what society considers purpose.
Mia, what is a
But
woman?
just, it's just, no, well, come on.
Go on, I had to answer, you
That's the
answer.
question. It was the
I-
question.
What is it? Well, I don't think it was directed at me. Of course, it's an adult human female. There's no other
What is that?
definition. But
What is that?
I'm an adult human female in Canada, legally.
Adult human female.
okay, no.
So go deeper.
Okay, well, first of all, the crucial part is female. A female is a person of the sex that, let me see if I can
That
get
is female,
Heather-
yes, go
Let me
on.
see if I can get Heather Hying's excellent definition. So a female is a person of the sex that can or will or would or could produce large gametes.
And that's
It's
relevant
just-
how
Well,
in our
so-
society?
No, I'm
Like,
just saying, you're
prove me
asking
your
me
ga-
to define
Yeah,
adult,
but-
human, female. It's very clear. An adult is somebody who has reached full sexual maturity. Human, don't need to define. And then female
So
has a very clear definition. But I want to go back to your definition because I always find this fascinating. A woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. It's just this circle.
Absolutely, like a Christian. European
But
identifies as those
pretends
things.
that I'm from, I don't know, another planet, and I've never heard the word woman before. Tell me what is a woman without using the word woman in the definition.
A woman is a person like me.
Okay, but let's say the space alien. You know what? I'm gonna leave this alone.
Yeah, I get it.
No, but I think it's really interesting that the foundational definition of being a woman is something that no one in this room is able to produce a proof of.
Okay.
It's a
It's
little
an adult
interesting.
human female. It's the simplest.
We're on to
It's
the
the
next
simplest
one.
definition.
First, I'd like to thank you both for coming because this is obviously a very fraught topic, and I think you both showed a ton of courage by coming. So I really, really appreciate it. My question is, I guess, since there was a couple, I'm going to sneak in a couple too. But they're going to be very short. I just want very direct answers about two topics. One is sports, and the other one is detransitioners. How do they fit into your kind of mental framework there?
Good question. Mia, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. Anyone familiar with my work knows that I almost never talk about sports. It's just not my issue. To me, it's just so completely absurd that anyone could ever think that males could fairly compete against females in most sporting categories. So no, it's ludicrous. It's a sign of how completely mad our society has gone that we ever even tolerated it for a moment. Detransition, oh goodness me, I could go on for a long time. I spend my days with detransitioners. I talk to detransitioners all the time.
Sorry to interrupt. Could we just get a definition? Because sometimes you hear detransition and sometimes you hear the word desistance.
It's the same in different communities.
Just explain to the crowd what those words mean.
A detransitioner is somebody who identified as transgender and then went through the gender medicine pathway, medically altered their body in some way with hormones and surgeries, and then at the end of it realized that it was a mistake, they're not transgender, and they stop medicalization. Then a desister is somebody who identified as transgender but did not medicalize, and then stopped identifying as transgender. And a lovely detransitioner that I recently interviewed gave me a great distinction between detransitioners as well. There's she has ideological detransition and medical detransition, and they're not the same thing. So some people can medically detransition, but not ideologically. They still actually believe themselves to be transgender, and they can't let go of that belief, and they'll often end up landing at non-binary because they can't quite come back to realizing that it was all a lie. And then the medical detransition or the ideological detransition, they realize that it was all a lie, but they've gone medically too far. Many of the detransitioners I talk to will say, there is no such thing as detransition. If a young man's had his penis chopped off, he's not detransitioning. There's no going back from that. So he's ideologically detransitioned, but medically there's nothing to be done. And I think we saw an explosion of young people identifying as transgender starting around 2014, 2015. And I think on a long enough timeline, the graphs of detransition will mirror that, because all of these young people, they were just lost and confused, and they were sold medical body modification as the remedy for their difficulties. And so I think we're looking at a wave of them coming. Well, the first wave is here, the second wave is here.
Morgane, sports, and I'm curious actually if you lump sports, because you did say there were a few categories where biological sex was sort of predominant. And then the other topic was detransition, and again, trying to be concise, just because we still have half a dozen people.
So sports, fascinating. True fact, genetic males are at a disadvantage of sport up until partway through their puberty, and then puberty kicks in, and then they when we're talking about advantage, of course, in the power and strength sports, the advantage shows up at around 12 to 14. So actually, the question more interestingly is, what is the purpose of sports? Why are there women's sports and girls' sports? And the reason there's girls' sports was because in global organizations like the UN and the precursor to the UN discovered that that girls were like just not getting exercise, and they were not getting exercise because girls doing sports wasn't culturally supported at the time, and so there was a push to basically to encourage girls to do sports in order to get better outcomes later on in their lives. And that was the reason sports was brought into girls in that time, a long time ago. Now, the purpose of sports, of course, is fitness and inclusion and being active and teaching competition and fairness, right? And then over time, you have an interesting problem, which is there an inherent advantage in certain sports based on physiology, right? And what do we do about that? So here we go into a really interesting conversation about, elite sports versus average sports, and another conversation about safety versus inclusion. And there are some sports, like for example, let's talk about boxing, and the fighting sports where they have weight classes. The weight classes are intended to be a reflection of reach and things like this, and they have those things to keep people of a similar capability in a similar cluster. And you have also other sports like rugby, where it's always fascinating to look at rugby and soccer and to look at the natural distributions of sex and weight and strength, and then to look at who the athletes are, and to look at the athletes, and they're nowhere near on the normal. They're all on the freak side, always. Athletes are on the exceptional end of
bring
sports.
this around to the question, though?
The exceptional end of sports is one where you get your advantage from being exceptional. And then the question, I think it's a really interesting question, is being trans, and how do we manage fairness in a place where you can be extraordinarily exceptional if you're non-medically transitioned trans person in sports? So a non-medically transitioned athlete in women's sport could be on the freakishly high, freakishly tall, freakishly strong scale for a male body. And is that not fair? And is that just dangerous? And some arguments have been made absolutely, which is why we require the people in the sports to have a certain range of hormones, a certain range of certain physiological characteristics. The way out of the problem with sports isn't to ban a demographic, because that's unfair and it's just bad practice to ban people. What you do is you come up with the population is, you're in this class or you're in this class.
Like testosterone limits.
Testosterone limit, or maybe, I don't know, strength limits, maybe, this is the league for people who can do a certain thing, and this is a league for people who can't, and this is the open league.
Okay.
Whatever. The other question was?
Detransition?
Detransition. Okay, so fun fact. Medical transition versus non-medical transition, detransition, 1. 2, transition because it wasn't me versus transition because society was so awful to me when I was trans, I decided I couldn't stand it. Versus permanent and not permanent. These are different factors. Medical detransition, 1/3 of a percent to 1% rate is what today, I just lost it. International meta-analyses show, which include Canadian centers, show 0.3 to 1% permanent reversal or regret after gender-affirming surgery. I'm sorry, objective data from studies trumps people talking to me every time.
So you're saying it's very rare?
It's quite rare. We have other data, regrets data, because medical transition, we ask ourselves what regret's going to look like. And I have experience, I've seen victims of medical regret from a medical transition and how it messes with them. It's pretty awful to go through something like transition, physical transition, getting your genitals reformatted. They're not destroyed, they're reformatted, but the reversal is extraordinarily difficult. So, but nothing is chopped off except that, okay, the testes or the ovaries are chopped off, but you could reconstruct that stuff if you really wanted to. So let's get, but regardless, it would not be
reformatted is
great.
what you do to a disc. I mean,
No, it's, you can, what? There are videos online about how you do bottom surgery and how it's
we're not watching those.
Anyhow,
We
it's really, really gory. I'm almost done, and you keep on talking about huge things.
You know what? No,
Okay,
I'm going to be even-handed here and say you both have to stop. That was a good long answer, and no more double questions.
Okay.
Who is the professor who started the first precedent of double questions? Your history's greatest monster. That was one question.
Okay.
Okay, good. I have one question. Again, thank you guys so much for being here. I respect the fact that you guys have been very cordial in this whole discussion. Very happy to see that. Very good. Honestly, a very basic question, just to kind of relate back to how we were discussing about definitions before. I'm curious, each of you guys' opinions on your opinions on the sex binary, if you believe in it or not, and how that relates to greater discussions around gender identity.
Okay. Mia, sex binary. I'm going to give you a meta binary, which is sex binary or non-binary?
I I am a believer in the sex binary. I am until somebody discovers the third gamete. I am going to be hardcore pushing the idea that there are only two sexes.
Gametes are egg and sperm, right?
Yes,
Okay.
sperm and egg. Without a third, you do not have a spectrum, and so therefore you have a binary.
Okay. Morgane.
Sex is bimodal, not binary.
Okay, and that's the distribution.
There's a distribution of sex characteristics on all dimensions of sex characteristics. Always, it is absolutely true that the gametes are programmed in a completely different way, in a binary way. There's two gametes, it's a two-gamete system that result in characteristics. The characteristics are caused by the interaction of many, many, many factors with a blueprint. The blueprint replication process is complex. It's fraught with issues. Generally speaking, there are two clusters. What there isn't, right, is certain sex characteristics, the primary sex characteristics, extraordinarily rarely flip, but they don't never flip. There's not
You mean the modes
never
the modes don't
an
cross each other?
XY chromosome pattern. There's not never a Y chromosome pattern without primary sex characteristics. There's not never no Y with male
Okay, this is really confusing.
sex characteristics.
Is there a sex binary?
But
No, it's because
how many
the reason
sexes
it's not
are there?
binary.
How many are there?
That's a simplistic question, and we're not here
It's
to
a
What's the
answer.
question?
question.
No,
That was
it's
the
not.
question. You can't argue.
There are
Yeah,
not
what gas-
100% of humans have X and Y, two chromosome components
I'm gonna trust you on
in
that.
their genetic
But what's your answer to
system.
this question?
There are numerous rare
Karyotypes.
exceptions.
Right.
These are karyotypes. I am not saying that I am a genetic female. Okay, that would be preposterous. I am saying that there is more diversity to this than the propaganda would have you believe in order to get you to take a simplistic answer to everything else is binary. It's not binary, it's bimodal.
Okay.
And you have the proof of this in 1,000 papers done by people who study that stuff, who will show you the distribution.
Duly noted, but just to be fair to the person that answered the question, Mia answered it in one syllable. Is there a sex binary? Yes or
And I
no?
said no.
Okay, fair.
Non-binary is not the same as, that's an identity, right? And that's, yeah, we can have another conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. My name's Daniel. I have a question about WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Came up a few times. There was a comment, I think, that it still is sort of seen as the standard. I think that maybe, despite the fact that the CAS review, other reviews of the medical literature are in contradiction with it. So what do we do with that? And is WPATH legitimate? Is the question to go back.
Okay, so the question is WPATH, which, just to remind ourselves, World Professional Association of
Health,
Transgender
World
Health.
Professional Association of Transgender Health.
Okay, and this, which for many years has presented itself as the gold standard in trans health. Mia, I know your answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is WPATH still the gold standard in trans health?
Absolutely not. In North America, clinics still follow WPATH, and somehow WPATH has survived all of the unbelievable scandals that have unfolded in the last few years, but WPATH's credibility is completely destroyed, mostly by emails that came in a court case, discovery emails in an Alabama court case that revealed this is a group that just is guilty of fraud, corruption, and has absolutely no respect for the scientific process. Its standards of care are built on thin air. They have no evidence, and yet they just pretend that there's evidence. They are engaged in politics, not science. And if a clinic is following WPATH, if a nation is following WPATH now, there's truly no excuse, and it's appalling, in my opinion.
Morgane, I'd like to.
I'll quote a famous transphobe, ridiculoso.
Okay.
This is ridiculous. You're talking about, so one person making assertions like this needs to have like peer-reviewed studies from highly respected sources that validate it. I cannot go around and say, universities don't exist. They're lying liars. Okay, I cannot go around. I need some evidence behind
the
this.
political dimension.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
It's no. Mia is saying that there are internal documents.
Politically discredited is her argument.
Politically discredited, but it's actually not true. Mia's political discredit. Her statement is a hugely overblown version of reality. Reality is, this is an organization that includes medical practitioners who have a very high reputation, except in Mia and some other non-practitioners' viewpoints. There are some dissenting people who say, yeah, I don't agree on this on various grounds. Well, you know what? Show us the data. Like, come up with some data. No, not you. You are not competent to show the data. The data will come from endocrinologists, will come from criminologists, will come from primary care and specialist physicians that will say, look, we're seeing an uptick in fill in the blank, right? The reality is WPATH has been active for 2 or 3 decades. TransCare has been going on for coming on 50 years now. And this mythical smoking gun, it's never been produced. It doesn't exist.
Oh.
There is no problem. There are just people running around saying, my hair is on fire. There's a huge problem. And it's time to stop talking about things as if they were a crisis and let the scientists and the doctors and the universities do their damn job. Their job is to validate, check it out, and see what they can do.
Okay.
And when the attack is, you're not following the following made-up standard, need to make sure that those standards are the universal standards for that kind of work.
Again, we get it.
May I
I'm a
not an
politician, I know what you're
endocrinologist,
talking.
but no,
The
Morgane,
standards have to be equivalent
We-
across practices.
Yeah, we get it.
Okay.
Please,
So just to be clear, I'm not talking about peer review. I'm not talking about studies. I'm not talking about peer review. I'm talking about, these are documents. WPATH was named in in a legal case in Alabama, and the Attorney General ordered WPATH to turn over 2 million internal emails of how they drew up their standards of care 8. And a small number of them have been released, and you can definitely call them the smoking gun. You can see in WPATH's own words in their internal documents how fraudulent this organization is. So I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. There's
This was
actual
reported by the New York
evidence.
Times,
So-
Morgane, right?
Hang on a
was it?
second.
Yeah.
What you are talking about is basically hand over your chat server, right, on a topic, and we're going to look for how you're talking wrong about a process that we think should be rigorous. But the process isn't what needs to be rigorous. What needs to be rigorous is the policy.
No,
Right?
it was
It
how
doesn't
they
matter.
it was
Like,
how they
imagine-
made standards of care 8. It was
it
all
was how
the
it was made.
emails on how they drew up standards of
like
care
they
8.
say,
Would you like me to
don't-
give some details? I
don't
can
look
give
at how the
details. Do you want
sausage is
details?
made.
Morgane,
Right?
in fairness, I think you spoke for a bit about how Mia is not an endocrinologist and she's ignorant, but I think it's fair to let Mia provide some detail.
Right, so I'll give a couple of examples of what these emails revealed. So when WPATH set out to create standards of care 8, the process started in 2018. And they had the idea that this would be an evidence-based standards. For the first time, they would have evidence. And so they commissioned a series of systematic reviews from Johns Hopkins, one of the best centers in the world. And they commissioned at least 13 of them. And then the first 2 come in, and this is all in the emails, you can see it. The first 2 come in and they're communicating with Johns Hopkins, and the reviews show that there's only really low quality evidence. There's no good evidence at all. So then WPATH just block the publication of all of the systematic reviews. We've seen 2, then they showed no evidence, and then the rest, we've never seen them. They blocked Johns Hopkins, which this is not how it works. Independent reviews, you don't interfere. And then they went ahead and created standards of care 8 as if the reviews had shown evidence. That's not science, that's politics, right? And the other really important smoking gun is, after WPATH published its standards of care 8 in 2022, September, within 24 hours in the adolescent chapter, there were minimum age recommendations, and then 24 hours later they were gone, and nobody knew what had happened. They just disappeared. And the internal discovery emails show that it was Admiral Rachel Levine, who was Biden's Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services. He was inside pressuring WPATH, his assistants, his team, telling them to remove the lower age limits because it would affect the legal challenges going on at the state level that the Democrats were fighting. So they changed the international standards of care that the clinics all over the world follow for treating adolescents based on Admiral Rachel Levine's request and based on American politics. That's just a tiny bit. I could go on for hours and hours about those emails, but they're emails. It's how they made standards of care 8. So any institution, any nation that still follows standards of care 8 is following a fraudulent document that is not scientific, it's just political.
Okay.
So I'm going to
briefly, though?
briefly,
Yeah.
if medical standards of care are wrong, the evidence is in the outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no evidence in outcomes that this is wrong. Perhaps, let's say it's true that it's wrong. Let's say that the standards of care are off, which I am not of the right professional skill sets to evaluate them in detail. But let's say somehow they are wrong. The truth will tell us they're wrong through statistics. We're very lucky, actually. We are in one of the very few countries that follows such statistics closely. I look forward to seeing those statistics,
It sounded
because
like
so far,
we had the statistics, but then they didn't want to publish them.
no, that's not what we're talking about.
Sounds like
You're talking about a learned organization saying this is what you should do. Why? Politics. Let's say it's politics. Okay.
It is.
Learned organization says this is what you should do, but they don't do the caregiving. The caregiving is done by caregivers. Those caregivers report their data to StatScan. They report their data to each other. They write papers about it saying, we're finding that, we treat this thing and that other unexpected thing outcomes. This isn't working, right? That's where the truth comes, is in the outcomes.
Clinical work. Okay.
Yeah.
We have another question?
Hi, my name's Sister Patricia, and I'm a male presenting lesbian. I'm not an academic. That's probably obvious to you. My question specifically for Morgane. Morgane, sorry. I came out in 53. I felt like a boy. I wanted to be a boy. I was desperate to be a boy. But in 53, that was an extremely dangerous thought even for this little Catholic girl. I looked like a bad drag queen in my first communion dress. Well, what I want to hear from you is, based on your experience, what do you think the possible statistics are regarding my survival rate if I had transitioned as a child in the 50s versus the glory days that we kind of experience now with the support systems in place and our right to exist, even though those who hate us will deny us. So that's what I'm looking for. What do you think those stats are?
I just want to make sure they're answering the right question. So when you say our survival statistics, what group are you talking about?
Trans.
Trans in general. Okay.
When you say hate, do you mean disagree?
It depends.
Oh, you want me to get into that? No, I just want to know that.
No, I don't think hate is disagree. It's different.
Okay. Morgane, would you like to take that first?
That's an interesting question. And I have, I'll try to keep it under 1 minute. I have data from trans people in other countries right now, right? They are discovered, they're killed. In Uganda, in Kenya to a lesser degree, in much of the East African countries, in North African countries, in Palestine, in Russia, much less so today. But 1950s Canada, you're trans, You're standard kid in a standard household, your family kills you. They don't get caught doing it. They get away with it. In the 70s, they disown you, they throw you out of the house. In the 90s, kids, they throw you out of the house. In the 2000s, there's huge fights at home. One parent takes your side. Huge fights. One person starts to like get all turfy and talk about OGD. In 2010, it starts to change a little bit. 2020, it really starts changing. Why? Because in about 2012, we started teaching in schools, at least in BC where I live. We started teaching in schools that who you are, only you know who you are, and that's fine. And you're great. And we can have huge battle lines about whether who you are is right or wrong. But ultimately, the fact is, if someone is going after you because of who you are, regardless of what that who is, you got a terrible dark future ahead of you. And things are much better now than they were in 2015 for youth. Much, much better. Trans rights being protected in law has made a huge difference. Suicidal rates have gone down significantly. Poverty rates have gone down. When we do the homeless youth surveys in the cities, it's changing. Fewer of the kids are queer because we've normalized queerness, LGBT, gender identity or expression. And we've done it without encouraging anything, just normalized it. You are who you are. You know who you are.
Sorry, I just want to give you a chance. I think you may
and
have
that's
misspoke.
the point. The point is,
I want to give you a chance to correct that because I think you accidentally said fewer kids are queer. Did you mean say more kids?
Fewer kids in the homeless counts are queer.
Okay, sorry about that.
Because fewer kids are being thrown out of their house for coming out to their parents. We're getting caught being queer. But in other countries where the protections aren't there, the stats haven't changed, right? And I've been helping refugees from the LGBT community in countries that are not nice to them.
Yeah.
And it's a really clear pattern there. The number one thing that decides how your kids are going to do is if you leave them alone. How you're going to do, the number one influencer about how I'm going to do as a trans person or as who I am, is to just be allowed to live.
Mia, looking for points of agreement here. It's good that Canada's not like some of the regressive jurisdictions that Morgane ticked off, right? I'm older than you, so I do remember that for gay children and also for trans-identified children, it was tough and sometimes dangerous to come out. So that's a good thing, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think there are pre-gay children, I suppose. Gender non-conforming children are destined to grow up to be homosexual adults. And so I think we're not in a better place in that gender non-conforming children now are told that they're members of the opposite sex. They're told that they're trans kids, and then they're set on a path towards lifelong medical intervention.
Who tells
so
them?
I don't believe I don't believe that's progress at all. I think we've regressed. But I think we were almost there in that we could accept gender nonconformity and we could accept homosexual adolescents and adults.
The early 2010s, maybe?
Yeah, we almost had it. And then this idea, the concept of the trans child came along and just ruined it all.
Okay, two diverging views.
I just want to thank both of you for being very brave here tonight. I may not agree with everything you've said, but I forgot to say I've also suffered from suicidal ideation since the age of 5, strictly because I could not be who I was. And I am not alone in that statistic. And when I hear things like, we chop their parts off, how do you think that feels for me? How dare you?
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Christina Fernandez. My question is for Mia, in the spirit of being in Waterloo and of protecting children. You gave us a definition of gender identity and you told us to brace ourselves in a room of adults. That same definition appears in the safe, caring, and inclusive surveys that happen every year at our WRDSB, the Catholic District School Board as well. and then it provides a link. They provide a link to the children as young as grade 3 or 4 to answer all these questions. And there's other questions, but since we're speaking on gender identity, I was wondering if you could give us any indication on whether or not there's anything being done to protect our kids on this front specifically, or any actionables that we can do as parents to have more parents aware, so that if this is what parents want, so be it, like a democratic society, well-informed consent, so be it. You'll get more of what you want and what you ask for. But until everyone knows exactly what's going on in the schools and being informed, it's not really a democracy, right?
Okay, so if I can summarize, and this one I think is maybe for Mia, probably solely, it's what can parents do to respond to what they perceive as,
Or anyone paying into the publicly funded schools, and yeah,
as maybe overly torqued or propagandistic surveys or literature or whatnot. Mia, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's difficult to, you can look to Alberta, that Alberta is getting it right in restoring reality to education, ensuring that children get to grow up grounded in truth. But in Ontario, I'm not really, there are great parent groups, there are great people, there are great groups speaking out. More and more people have the courage to say that this is ideological, dangerous, ideological nonsense, and that it doesn't belong in our classrooms.
Tell us about, briefly, I mean, this isn't a commercial, tell us about your group. What does your group do?
Well, that's right. I'm the director of GenSpec Canada. We advocate for a non-medical approach to gender-related issues for children, adolescents, and adults. And yeah, we're going to be focusing a lot on education and healthcare, and much of it will be providing an alternative to our schools are just infected with this ideology. And none of it's grounded in truth, and it's an enormous safeguarding failure that we thought that we allowed this to happen. We allowed our children to have their minds poisoned by this. As for what the individual can do, I would say talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Show your neighbors, show anyone who will listen what exactly children are being taught, and explain the impact, because it looks harmless, right? And I don't think the people teaching this have malicious intent. I think they're teaching it because they think this is the compassionate thing to do. And that's the biggest hurdle. You've got to show people who really truly mean well that they're doing harm, and that can be very difficult. But it starts with just talking about it, and talking about it in a calm, reasonable, patient way.
Morgane, I'm not sure it's an apt question for you, but do you have any advice for parents?
I did run 2 of my children through the K-12 system, and I was the chair of the Vancouver District Parent Advisory Committee, which looked after the interests of 60,000 children. Do you have children, Mia?
I do.
Okay, good. So what do I know? I do know that I hear a lot of incendiary language in the presentation, like in fact, things like this. Fascinating. We had a conversation about hate speech before, which went viral. But I made some recommendations about, maybe we shouldn't use hate speech here. I recommend that there's a very big difference between telling parents and children that there are other parents and children that are different than like them. And that's very different than telling children they're trans. I have never seen a teacher or a caregiver telling a child they're trans. In British Columbia, telling a child they're trans would be psychiatrist malpractice grounds. Don't know what it's like here. Maybe you are in the wild east, the crazy Western Maritimes. I don't know. But there are standards of care, and for children, for teachers, for psychiatrists, doctors, and even a medical practitioner talking to a youth asking for gender affirming care is expected and required to look for a kid that's insistent, persistent, and consistent in their cross-gender identity. And it's considered a very, very bad thing to do, to stick it into the kid's idea that they're trans. Now, of course, there's a social media, and I think good parenting teaches our kids about how to handle social media.
Not just on this issue, but
on all issues. And here it's about identity, right? And I have a question for Mia and Genspec, right?
Sorry, we're gonna.
No, because she brought it up.
No, I
Please
brought it.
bear with me for a moment.
No, Morgane, we're not gonna go. I brought it up. It's on me. That's on me. So we have. I
You
don't want.
did.
There's three. No, there's three people waiting. Morgane, there's three people waiting to ask questions. If we have time, we'll grill Mia on her LinkedIn.
Hi. So it's going to be a very quick question. It's sort of a yes or no for Morgane. So my question is it possible that there's somebody out there or somebody in here who does not view you as a woman, does not want to call you she and her, and isn't hateful, is not a transphobe? Is that possible?
It is absolutely possible that somebody in here doesn't think I'm a woman. I'm going to say a third, probably. But I would also say that we live in a society.
But there was a second part of the question.
Yeah.
Of that subset, is it possible that within that subset, there are people who you would not classify as hateful?
Oh, hateful is not what you believe. Hateful is how you behave. Hate speech is saying something by being hateful.
So you don't have to be a believer.
Like-
I don't need to believe in gender identity.
Can I, quick show of hands. Who here has a faith? Believes, a person of a faith? Okay. All right. Who here is of a faith that's not Christian? All right. See? Yeah, we're in the same room. We expect not hateful behavior towards each other, generally speaking, right? No one has to believe that I am who I am, but we have, as a society, put laws together that says that whether you are of an Abrahamic faith or not, whether you are of fill in the blank or not, whatever your belief system is, right? We're not going to allow others to pick on you because of it.
But if I could bring it to a point, if there was somebody here who said, I respect you, this is hypothetical, but I believe you're biologically male and I'm going to use male pronouns to address you, and then they did use male pronouns to address you, would you say that person is, by virtue of that fact, definitely a hateful person?
I would say that person is extraordinarily shitty.
Okay.
Right?
Is that the same as hateful?
And that's,
is that the same as hateful?
Look, hate is poorly, like, hang on. Hate speech is vilification, demonizing, and pathologizing people because they're in a recognizable group. That is hate speech. And even there, you have to be likely to cause a disturbance in order for it to be a criminal act. The rest of it, impossibly shitty.
Next question.
Morgane, in opening statements, you alluded to, I don't know if you used the words exactly, moral panic, but you kind of suggested that there were phenomena in history that we see repeatedly. And I want to point this to Mia because you're the viral queen of social contagion and moral panic. And I want to give or invite a response or comment on moral panic from you with respect to this issue.
Yeah.
Could you just clarify the question a little bit more? Are you asking her, is this phenomenon a moral panic?
Well, I think there's a gap in what we've been able to hear from Mia tonight about social contagion, moral panic, and I would just love to hear your comments on that in the context of.
Okay, and the background.
Yeah, sure. Really.
Right. So the background here is that earlier Morgane, I believe, talked about like demon worship and
I said that a moral panic is a manufactured, concerned, trolling phenomenon designed around the concept of there's a them that are harming.
And you gave examples.
And I gave example, and that's the understood example of moral panic.
And so, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, you're asking Mia, is she creating a moral panic, or maybe the question is, does she think that the trans phenomenon is a result of moral panic?
Participating in moral panic.
I know, but I don't care about you.
But I think a lot of us gender critical people
Okay.
have been accused.
Okay,
of
so
that.
the question
Maybe
is,
they-
so the
maybe
question
you
is,
would respond to that
has
accusation.
Mia been accused of spreading moral panic? And is she in fact guilty of spreading a moral panic?
No, is that the question, or are you asking her if transness is a moral panic?
Well, you nodded his head, so talk to us about moral panic.
I will talk about moral panic. So yeah, a moral panic is when large swathes of the population fabricate an evil or a danger, and kind of it's a mass hysteria, and they persecute and they go after innocent people, and the evil or the danger is not real. So the Salem witch trials, of course, we all know everybody was terrified of witches and killed innocent women who were not witches. The witches were not real. Satanic panic is another great one that Morgane referred to in the opening statement. This was large swathes of the American population became convinced that there were satanic cults operating out of daycares, and they're digging, looking for tunnels under daycares. The evil wasn't real. They traumatized lots of children, and innocent people went to prison. And so, but this situation is, it's, how would I put it? It's like an inverted moral panic. So with the trans phenomenon, the harm is real, okay? What I'm speaking about, go on TikTok, put in top surgery, and you can see thousands and thousands of girls with their mastectomy scars gashing across their chests. The harm is real. You can go on phalloplasty TikTok, you can listen to detransitioners. And so, but society's response to that is inadequate, completely inadequate. We are ignoring it, or we're celebrating it, or we're demanding that it continue. But then the real inversion is the fear and the panic is directed towards the people like me who are speaking out against it. So there is a moral panic, but it's directed in the opposite direction. It's directed at the people trying to protect children.
Morgane, I'm guessing everything Mia just said, if I flip it at 180 degrees, that's your view, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So but I think here's the interesting thing, right? The facts will be borne out in research, right? So Mia proposes that the moral panic is in the supportive wave supporting trans people who transition, and that if we were to only put a nice wall to contain all those mentally ill people into a bucket, to say, no, you stay down there, don't talk about yourself, because you're inherently broken,
Okay,
then we
it'd be
wouldn't have the
helpful
moral
if you,
panic.
wait, Morgane, it'd be helpful if you didn't categorize.
So let me try,
Exactly.
let me
Don't tell
try
me what I
differently.
think.
then.
That's not fair.
You seem to be saying that the hysterical response, I know it's a bit of a charged word, is in the level of support for the phenomenon of someone transitioning, and that if we and that has gotten out of hand, and you seem to be saying that the problem isn't that people are overstating detransition rates or regret rates. The problem is that there's people out there who get transsexual surgery and then show it, and clearly those TikTok videos prove that there's a problem. And the moral panic is people don't understand. People like you raising a red flag saying, look, this is out of control. We are like not understanding you, and we're saying, no, you're a witch.
That's actually a very fair summary of what
That's
she
what
said.
I think, right?
That is fair, yeah.
And I propose that that's where we're diametrically opposed. You think that you're being punished for speaking the truth. I think you are completely misrepresenting the situation. And the situation is not at all like you say. And the proof is in the medical practitioner data. There is no support. There's no tsunami of legal cases. There's 150,000 Canadians who are trans. There's 1.5 million Americans who are trans. If 10% of them detransitioned and had been hurt, you would have a significant number of legal cases.
In the United States, there actually are a lot of legal cases, but Canada's
but you don't have the numbers, right?
Okay,
you have
fair.
a statistically insignificant number of
One
complaints.
more person in line, and I'm going to be really proud.
Two.
Oh.
And we'll take any more you want.
I thought we were going to get through the
Until
whole
we're kicked
line.
out, we'll
Sorry.
stay.
Okay, well.
So that the numbers don't show up to support your argument.
Thank you both for this discussion, and thank you, John, for moderating all of this. In both of your opening statements, you referred or alluded to shelters, rape crisis centers. And Morgane, I understand that you've been involved in litigation connected to the defunding.
No litigation, but action.
In an action connected to such defunding of a rape crisis shelter. And so my question is, why does or should gender identity trump the needs of vulnerable women to a sex segregated space, particularly given that it's vulnerable women who are seeking that? And why not focus efforts instead on creating a safe space specifically for trans people?
Okay, I'm just some background. This is the Vancouver Rape Relief Center in Vancouver, and the backstory here is that the administrators there were preventing a trans-identified biologically male person from accessing the space as a volunteer, and it became a big issue in Vancouver among the trans community. And the question relates, Morgane, to your participation.
To my participation.
I just wanted to give people the background, because in Vancouver it's extremely well known, as I understand, but maybe not as much.
I can give a preamble of what I did.
The question, I guess, is whether you think it would be better to have a special trans space for people who need to access shelters, as opposed to permitting.
And the same concept would apply to prisons or to other spaces.
Would that be a better
sex segregated spaces?
Would that be a better
gender
alternative?
segregated? Okay, so since about 2013, there was an advocacy initiative that I was part of, that I think it's fair to say, an engineer of, that instead of attacking in the press the actions of organizations that discriminate against trans people, go after the money, right? And the idea was to advocate for Canadian funders to hold accountable organizations that discriminate against people on explicitly prohibited grounds. That became more easy to do, of course, after Bill C-16 and the provincial bills. Now, what was not done is no attempt was made to shut down a rape crisis center. That was never done. No attempt was made to force a rape crisis center to change its behavior.
The city council stripped funding, though, didn't they?
Here's what did happen. Some people other than me pointed out to the city that a small grant of $35,000 on a budget of $1 or $2 million per year, so fairly small amount of money, which was questionably being redirected to pay for a staffer, despite the money was supposed to be used for other purposes, but we'll leave that alone. I'll just put that there as a seed. That money, that grant was renewed every year, and that was a grant specifically earmarked for public education and outreach. And Vancouver Rape Relief had this grant and had had it for some time, and it was pointed out that an organization that discriminates against women on the basis of being transgender, which is a violation of Vancouver's standards and a violation of provincial law, should not be doing outreach on gendered violence and domestic violence and such things. They were given a year to change the policy and to find a way to change the policy, and they refused. They said trans women are men, fuck off, basically is what they did, and they ate the loss instead of any negotiation or any meeting in the middle. What was this really about? This was really about a service organization involved in political work. I understand the history of that organization. That organization is one of the original rape crisis movements organizations. Those organizations came to be on politics, the politics of women deserving equal protection from violence that men were given at the time in '73 when they came to be. They were like women, there were no shelters for women at all, and they were one of the first. However, that organization is just like not meeting best standards. There's a lot of reasons why that organization shouldn't operate.
Because it doesn't admit trans-identified biological male.
But the question really that I think you're asking, because an organization is just an organization, it's just a legal entity. This isn't like, what about the people who experience sexual assault? Do Women make up most of the sexual assault
No, the question was,
survivors.
would
Yes,
they be better served at a trans-only facility? That
I
was the
can't.
question.
I'm getting to it. It's
Okay.
this. You're asking a pretty delicate question here, right? So, absolutely, sexual assault survivors need to be supported in a trauma-informed way, and that means taking into account the needs of that person. Absolutely, those needs are myriad and complex. The question is, though, that you're asking is a little different than that. What you're actually asking is, should we exclude people because they are of a
That wasn't the
demographic
question.
that is likely to have been
Sorry, to be
identified
fair, that wasn't
as
the
a
question. The
demographic?
question was, should there be a separate facility, an
So-
additional facility
so
for trans people to get
Correct,
services? Yeah.
and I'm getting to it. When we talk about,
Sorry, could you answer that question? Because
So
we
they
have
should,
one
so,
more person left. and
no,
then the
because
answer.
that would result in less funding for women's centers.
Okay.
So that would be a bad idea.
Okay.
In order to be effective, we would have to take away money from women's centers to do that.
Okay. That's-
Because of the infrastructure costs of running
That is a very
program.
clear answer, and thank
So,
you for that.
but there's another question, which is,
No.
is a,
Morgane,
there is a very,
you were asked a question, you answered, and by the way, that was an admirably concise answer that you gave, albeit on my prodding. Mia, what is your answer to the question? Is it better for trans people to have their own shelters, or do you think a binary system for rape crisis shelters is fine?
Yeah, of course, I think female-only spaces must exist. And this is the zero-sum nature again, that if a male person is in a female-only space, then it ceases to be female-only. So sure, I think we have to have the female-only space, and then other services, other campaign to get services set up for other people who need it.
So you'd be in support of maybe a third shelter for people who are trans?
Of course.
Okay. We have one more question, and now I can boast that I got through all the people. Not happening.
Thank you both. In the early 1990s in Canada, there was a public reckoning of sexual abuse in schools, youth, sports, and churches. This reckoning led to safeguarding principles for everyone involved with children, including the golden rule that there should be no secrets between adults and children, and that children should always tell their parents if an adult was trying to keep a secret with them. With the rise of gender ideology, there seems to be a collective amnesia as to why these principles, and specifically this rule, came into being, and it seems to be going out the windows, even in our own school districts. Teachers are keeping trans declarations secret from children's parents. My question is, should teachers keep secrets from parents in the absence of evidence of abuse? Are we creating a new priestly class?
Okay, so, and this is, I think, as I understand, well, it was the rule in Alberta, I think. The idea is that if a child goes to a teacher and says, I'm trans, in some jurisdictions, the teacher isn't supposed to tell the parents. Okay. And the question is, do you agree that that's a good policy? Okay. Morgane?
there is a law in every province in Canada and just about in every country that's a modern progressive democracy that says that the confidential conversation in a school between a teacher and a student is confidential. We have that law so that the school doesn't out the girls who had an abortion or are on birth control or who were raped. If you go and do it only because it's transness, then that's discriminatory. It's because you don't believe in transness, and that is discriminatory. The thing you're asking for is to strip the ability of a child to go to a trusted elder and talk about things they don't feel safe talking about at home. That's what you're asking for, or you're proposing as a concept. The reason why we have this safeguard is because there are a small number of kids out there who on specific topics cannot go to their parents, like, you know, on religious grounds, on ideological grounds, or whatever the reason is. And we train the teachers to handle this, and we train the administrators on managing it. It's not about being trans, it's about confidentiality of things that the kid says, don't talk to my parents
So your
about.
answer is the teacher should keep the secret from the parents.
It's part of a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is child safety comes first.
And I'm going to obviously say the opposite. So there is something different about trans in that the change of name and pronouns, this social transition, it's not, it's a non-medical intervention, but it's actually a really powerful psychosocial intervention. And when a young person socially transitions, adopts a new name and new pronouns, it cements the transgender identity in their minds. And it goes, adolescence is a time of experimentation. It's a time to try on different identities, and that's perfectly normal. But the problem with the trans identity is it comes with a medical pathway, and we also have a field of medicine that has lost its moral and ethical compass, that is willing to perform interventions based on no evidence whatsoever. And so, no, absolutely not. No teacher should be keeping this a secret from parents, because if the parents are to stand any chance of getting their adolescent help, psychoethical, psychotherapeutic support to try and figure out what has led them to come to the conclusion that they are trans, they need to know right away, and they need to be involved. And the very idea that a parent is abusive just for, you know, if her daughter comes out as a boy and she doesn't accept that her daughter is a boy, the very idea that that's abusive is completely absurd.
No, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous.
Oh, it's not
Absolutely
abusive.
ridiculous. I have first-person experience, numerous, dozens
All right, everyone.
of experiences.
I'm
that
sorry. I'm
trump
going
this.
to have to use the organizer privilege to end this. It's getting late. I regret, because it was a really fascinating conversation, and I have to say, I think this went well.
Does she get to finish?
I'm sorry. We're gonna finish it
If
all
she
off.
doesn't
we
misspeak
need to-
or
we need to finish.
misrepresent, absolutely.
So thank you, everyone. But I do think this is a very optimistic event, because I think it shows, maybe you agree, that this actually does show we can talk about something difficult at a university in 2025. So maybe we're turning a corner. So any students out there who want to find a good university, come to Laurier. We want you. All right. So again, I would just like to thank both of our speakers again. Again, very courageous, wonderful work. Let's give a round of applause for both of them. And finally, John, I mean, thank you so much. No. I tried this once before, and it was just a disaster. I cannot moderate. So I'm just so grateful you got me out of a jam and did a fantastic job. And anyway, and thank you all for coming. We don't have to clap anymore, but anyway, just thank you again, and have a good evening.